Uh, Hello? 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 Could we get everyone to come on in, please? It's a great day, isn't it? I'd like to welcome, first of all, our visitors, and while I'm welcoming the visitors, I would like to have the children come on up for their singing. Visitors, we're so thankful you're here. This is a wonderful Labor Day weekend, and we appreciate your presence. And ask you to please fill out the green side of the visitor card in the pew in front of you. And members, you know what to do with the black side. And we're having a wonderful meal this Wednesday. Visitors, you're more than welcome to join us at 6 o'clock. And we welcome you and thank you. And children, come on up. Any children? Okay, Chad.
All children invited to come up and sing with us. Mom or dad can bring you if they need to, but all kids are invited to come sing a few children's songs. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, stomp your feet. If you're happy and you know it, say amen. Amen. If you're happy and you know it, amen. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. If you're happy and you know it, say amen. If you're happy and you know it, do all three. Amen. If you're happy and you know it, do all three. Amen. If you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show. If you're happy and you know it, do all three. Amen. Jesus love just a bubbles over now. Jesus love just a bubbles over now. Jesus love just a bubbles over now. He loves you now, now, now. Praise the Lord that it bubbles over now. Praise the Lord that it bubbles over now. Praise the Lord that it bubbles over now. He loves you now, now. I want you just to bubble over now. I want you just to bubble over now. I want you just to bubble over now. He loves you now, now, now. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart. I got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart to stay. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart, down in my heart. And I'm so happy, so very happy. I've got the love of Jesus in my heart.
Great enthusiasm. Well, I think I asked you to fill out visitor cards, and I didn't tell you what to do with them. Pass them to the center aisles, and they'll be picked up during the song. Also, we're starting our connection groups tonight, and if you're visiting and want to join a connection group, we invite you to do that, and we also have a group meeting here at the church at 6. And if you're wondering what you're going to be studying, just listen carefully to David's sermon today, because that will be the topic of discussion for the connection group. So, advance warning, there will be a test. No, We're going to have a great discussion about the topic from David's sermons today. So let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer now. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this day and for our many opportunities to come and study, worship, and love you. We thank you that you love us. You loved us so much that you gave us your Son, and that we believe in him and have life eternal. We'd ask now that as we enter this time of praise, worship, that you'd be with us, bless us, and keep us. In Christ's name, amen.
I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. I know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. I know the Lord and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. I know the Lord, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. I know the Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. I will call upon the Lord. You are the words and the music. You are the song that I sing. You are the melody. You are the harmony. Praise to your name I will bring. You are the Lord of lords. You are the mighty God. You are the King of all kings. So now
a beautiful song. But there is one part of it that I don't necessarily disagree with. The song says, I don't know why he loved me so, and I can't give an answer. And John says, it was done exactly because God loved us so. He gave his only begotten Son, that he wanted fellowship with us. Paul says, even though we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We come this morning to remember Jesus Christ himself instituted this supper the night before he was crucified. He was in the upper room, and he gave bread to the 12 apostles, and he said, take and eat, for this is my body. In the same light, he gave the wine, and he said, take and drink, for this is my blood of the new covenant. As often as you eat and drink, do so in remembrance of me. So the question is, briefly, what is it we're remembering? The song says it beautifully, but Christ have also, and the scriptures tell us. In Luke, the 18th chapter, in the 31st verse, it says, and he, that is Jesus Christ, took the 12 aside, and he said to them, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and all things which are written through the scripture about the Son of Man will be accomplished. For they will deliver him to the Gentiles, and he will be mocked and mistreated and spat upon. And after they have scourged him, they will kill him. And on the third day, he will rise again. And you ask yourself sometimes, what is that all about? I think Jesus agonized in the Garden of Gethsemane so desperately because there was one thing he had never experienced in all existence, and that is his separation from his Father. Hanging upon a cross, he was mocked. He was mocked by those who were passing by. He was mocked by the two robbers who were crucified on either side of him. He was even mocked by the chief priest and the scribes and the Pharisees. And it says, now about noon, the third hour, darkness fell upon the land until 3 o'clock, the ninth hour. Excuse me, the sixth hour, darkness fell, which is noon, until the ninth hour, which is 3 o'clock. And about the ninth hour, that is 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Lama, Lama, or Eli, Eli, Lama Sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you forsaken me? Paul, who is not known for his short sentences, and that may be an understatement, tells us very clearly in one very distinct sentence why he died and why God turned his back. Paul writes, he made him, that is, God made him, Jesus Christ, who knew no sin, to be sin on our behalf, that we might become righteous by God in Christ Jesus. That's what he asks us to remember. This day and every day upon the first day of the week that we assemble, because we're here because of him and God's love. Shall we pray? Father, as the song says, we can't fathom the extent of your love for us. And yet we know that Christ gave his life in obedience to you because of your love for us, that he paid the price. Help us to reflect on the pain, the agony, the emotions that was going through. Yes, even a separation. While he hung on a cross, his body being excruciatingly painful. Help us to remember as we take this bread. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Oh Lord, help us to remember. Remember the precious blood, the sinless blood, the blood that took Christ's life and gives us life. The blood that flowed possibly from the wound of the crowns on his thorns on his head, certainly from his hands and his feet, and the spear that was thrust in his side. The blood that flows from Calvary and continues to wash us and makes us holy and acceptable in your sight. Father, thank you, thank you, thank you. Help us as we partake, that we may remember in a manner pleasing unto you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Not only did Christ ask us to remember what he did for us with the bread and the wine, but he also asked that we remember the blessings that we receive from God. Not a part of the Lord's Supper, but separate and apart, but every opportunity we have. Christ paid it all, and God gave his all. And since the days of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, God has always required of his people the first fruits, not what's left over, but what comes first. I ask each of us to reflect on that as we have the opportunity to give back because he so graciously gave to us. Shall we pray? Father, we know that all you've done for us, and we know that we're truly a blessed people. And Father, we know that to show our love for you, your desire is that we give cheerfully, give purposely, give sacrificially, give the first fruits in our display of our love for you. Father, we ask your blessing upon this giving. We ask the church that we may use it wisely in spreading the good news throughout this community and throughout the world. O Lord, is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen.
I'm going to join with Dwayne in welcoming all of our guests. We are glad that you're here, and I want to explain just real briefly what you're about to witness. One of the traditions that we have here is anytime someone is baptized into Christ, born again, and raised to walk in newness of life, and God Himself adds him to the body or them to the body of believers, we have a place for them here. But also, anytime someone who moves into this community from somewhere else and they have already been added to the body of believers and they just want to let us know that they want to be a part of the work and worship here, we also have a towel for them. It's called the servant's towel, and this is based upon the example in John chapter 13 when Jesus drapes a towel around his waist and gets down on his knees and washes the feet of his followers. And so when someone comes to us and wants to be a part of the body here, then the place that we have for them is a place of service. And so Debbie Scott, Debbie has been visiting with us for some time now. She is the Hammond's daughter, and she has her servant towel. If you haven't met Debbie, you'll want to. And then also John and Rebecca Gwinnett from Spokane, Washington. Oh, here. Good dodge, Charlie. If you have not met the Gwinnups, you'll want to do that as well. As Dwayne also mentioned, tonight is starting up our new round of connection groups as we're going to be discussing what God has to say to us on these morning times and hopefully even go into more depth and detail in your connection groups and expand upon what we share on these Sunday mornings. And so we hope that you'll make a plan to either be a part of one of the many, many home groups that will be meeting throughout the village or come back and be here at 6 o'clock and meet with the group here. Let's continue on with our worship this morning.
Let's stand together as we sing the song before the scripture reading and our message this morning. And as we sing our Bible, our children can be dismissed. In my life, Lord, be glorified, be glorified. In my life, Lord, be glorified today. In my song, Lord, be glorified, be glorified. In my song, Lord, be glorified today. In your church, Lord, be glorified, be glorified. In your church, Lord, be glorified today.
Good morning. Today's scripture reading is 2 Peter chapter 3, 8 through 9. But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping His promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, He is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance.
Before I actually begin this morning, I want us to take a moment of silence and prayer for a couple of different things. You are aware in the news that the storm that is headed towards Florida still has some real damaging potential there. But then also, you no doubt are aware of the tragedy that took place in Midland, Odessa, with another one of those inexplicable mass shootings. And so families are grieving this very morning and making funeral arrangements that they never expected to be making. And so let's spend a moment in silence, and then I'll also word that prayer. Holy Father, even as we are gathered here together this day to worship You, we are mindful of other parts of this country that are potentially going to be experiencing some real difficulties, whether it be through the natural disaster of hurricanes or the tragic disaster of more evil being perpetrated upon Your creation. We confess to You that we understand very little about either. And so we're left to just simply rely upon You, to place our trust, our faith in You, and hopefully be drawn closer to You and not allow Satan to use those as more opportunities to drive us further away, but just to come to You, lean upon Your name, trust in Your Spirit, trust in Your comfort, and spread this message of love, this message of forgiveness, this message of doing unto others as You would have us do, even unto our very selves and unto You, to love one another as we love ourselves. And as we think about the need to help one another when tragedy does strike, just give us the insight to be able to help where we can. And through Jesus we pray. Amen. Are you ready for a word from God this morning? Yes. Well, we have been going through a series of studies on life-changing stories where God's hand has touched people through Jesus, and we've seen how Jesus has offered new life to a lot of different people. He's offered redemption to people. He's offered a new way of living. He's offered forgiveness. He's offered mercy and grace. And He does that, and He did that, and He continues to do that because of the passage that Brett just read for us out of 2 Peter chapter 3. God is not willing for anyone to perish, but instead for everyone to come to repentance. God's will is for everyone to just come home, to just return to Him. And so that brings us then to this Word of God that you just said you're ready for. It's found in Luke chapter 15. This is a series of stories that no doubt you will be familiar with. Beginning in Luke chapter 15, it says, "Now the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus." Now I want you just to capture that scene for a brief moment. With all that Jesus has been doing, with the lives that He's been touching, with the lives that He's been changing, the tax collectors and the sinners are all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were muttering, "This man welcomes sinners, and He eats with them." This man has the audacity to associate with these sinners, with these lost ones, with these irredeemable ones in their eyes, in their estimation. And now it is to that group, it is to that closed-minded, stiff-necked, self-righteous people that Jesus tells these three stories. He tells about the lost sheep. He tells about the lost coin. And he tells about the lost son. And before I get into it too deeply, I want to make a real distinction here, because this just caught my eye, maybe not for the first time, but more profoundly than it has ever done before. These three stories have a lot of similarities, but they also have one real difference. And I don't know if you've ever noticed the difference. Maybe you have. But in the story of the sheep, the shepherd very actively, aggressively goes in search for the sheep, correct? This is an open book test. You can look if you need to. That's correct, right? The shepherd actively, aggressively goes in search for the sheep. In the case of the lost coin, the woman turns her house upside down in search for the coin, actively, aggressively searching for the coin, correct? But in the lost son, the father stays home and passively, although longingly and watchfully, waits for the son to come home. That's a huge difference, isn't it? Why the difference? Well, in the case of the sheep, sheep don't have a whole lot of sense. Now, that's not a whole lot of difference. But the sheep just kind of wander off. They just kind of wander off. And they have no inability to make the decision to go home. And they have no capability in finding their way home, should they even come to that decision. In the case of the coin, coins have less sense than sheep. It has no idea it's lost. It has no thinking capability whatsoever. The only way the sheep can be found is to aggressively search for it. The only way the coin can be found is to aggressively search for it. But in the case of the son made the willful choice to leave. And the son would have to make the willful choice to return. Big difference. And so in that story, in Luke chapter 15, no doubt you've heard many different lessons on this, many different sermons on this. I don't know how many times I've taught from this. And we spend a lot of time with different things about the squandering of his wealth, and we spend time talking about the other brother and making some distinctions about the other brother and his hard heart, and all of those other lessons I think are valid as you approach this study. But I want to focus on one particular aspect of the story that maybe has escaped the depth of power that it needs to have upon us. And that is in verse 17 of Luke chapter 15. when the son comes to his senses that the sheep didn't have and that the coin didn't have, when the son comes to his senses, he says, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death. And so I will set out, and I will go back to my father, and I will say to him. He is developing his speech. He's developing the spiel he's going to give as he returns to his father. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And so he got up and he went back home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. And so we've talked about that, how the father was obviously looking, maybe every day, looking down that road, until on this day he saw that very familiar gait of his son's stride. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him, and his father was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son, and he threw his arms around his son, and he kissed his son. Where had his son just been? In a pig pen. Wonder how long this journey back home was. That didn't matter to the father one bit. The smell, the filth, the stench didn't matter to the father one bit. He was moved with compassion. And he ran to his son. And he threw his arms around him. And he kissed him. And then the son now says to the father, here's the speech, here's the spiel. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And the father says to the son, exactly where have you been, son? And exactly what have you done, son? Your Bible doesn't say that. You know why your Bible doesn't say that? No Bible says that. That's not what the Father says. That's not what the Father does. But the Father said to the servants, what? What's the very next word? Quick! Quick! This is urgent. This is exciting. This is something important. Quick! Bring the best robe. Not any robe. Go get something for him to put on. No. Bring the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead, and he is alive again. He was lost, and now he is found. So they began to celebrate. Now, here's some similarities with those three stories. There's celebration in all of them, isn't there? When that lost sheep is found, the shepherd places it upon his shoulders, brings it back, and they celebrate. And the Bible tells us there is celebration in heaven when one sinner repents, just like this celebration of the lost sheep being found and brought back. When the woman finds the coin, she calls her friends together and they celebrate because what was lost has now been found. And the Bible tells us that's what goes on in heaven with the angels in heaven when one sinner repents. And now in this story, it is amazing to me that there is no interrogation from the Father about what the Son has done. The heart of the Father is just come home. Just come home. Is that not powerful to you? Last Lord's Day, when we did the story of walking in the light, and we saw that continual cleansing of the blood of Christ as long as we're walking in the light. That's the picture of what God is longing for. That's why God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Just come home. Doesn't matter where you've been. Doesn't matter what you've done. What matters is you've come to your senses. And you've come home. You just want to be my servant? I don't think so. You're my son. You just want to be my slave? I don't think so. You're my daughter. Wear the best robe. Wear the ring that identifies you as a part of this family. And let's celebrate. I don't do this very often. In fact, I don't do it much at all, which is similar to very often. But I want to read a section that I extracted from a book because I think it speaks in better ways than I can to what I'm trying to get across. It's not a pretty sight, the pig pen of sin, filth, smelly, rottenness that sticks to your skin, it mats your hair, and it fills your soul. And it's hard. It is so hard to get clean again. You can't even really track your path to this pit of slime. And it wasn't always like this. 1 minute life was a party. And then in a blink, this. Or maybe you traveled a very slow downward spiral. Small steps were taken. Wrong turns were made. But each decision was moving you miles away from the Father, who would do anything to have you return home. I want to come home. And there's only one clear view from the pig pen, and that's to look up. Look up to the one who can rescue you, and listen, because God is calling. You remember in the illustration, if you were here last Lord's Day, we gave that illustration of mountain climbing, and you are trying to reach the peak. You're headed for the peak, but you grab a hold of something that's not as strong or as fixed as you thought, and you slip. You begin to fall. That's a sin. That's something that's illustrative of how a sin enters into your life, and it might be a very sudden sin. And so it happens in an instant. 1 minute, you're walking, you're climbing, you're whistling. But the next minute, you're wide-eyed and you're falling. Satan has yanked back the manhole cover. And an innocent afternoon stroll turns into a horror story. Helplessly, you tumble. You're aware of the fall, but you're unable to gain control. You crash at the bottom, and you stare blankly into the darkness. You inhale the evil stench, and you sit there in Satan's sewage until he spits you out and you land dumbfounded and shell-shocked on the sidewalk. Such is the pattern of sudden sin. Can you relate to that? Very few sins are premeditated and planned. Very few of us would qualify for Satan's strategy team. We spend our time trying to avoid sin, not planning it. But don't think for 1 minute that just because you don't want to fall that you won't. Don't think for 1 minute that just because you don't want to fall, you won't. I think Paul said, "Let he who thinks he stand take heed, lest he fall." Satan has a very special trick for you, and he only pulls it out when you aren't looking. This yellow-bellied father of lies doesn't dare meet you face to face. No, sir, don't expect this demon of demons to challenge you to a duel. Not this snake. He hasn't the integrity to tell you to turn around and put up your dukes. He fights dirty. He is the master of the trap door. He is the author of weak moments. He waits until your back is turned. He waits until your defense is down. He waits until the bell is rung and you're walking back to your corner. Then he aims his dart at your weakest point and bullseye. You lose your temper. You lust. You fall. You take a drag. You buy a drink. You kiss the woman. You follow the crowd. You rationalize. You say yes. You sign your name. You forget who you are. You break your promise. You buy that magazine. You lie. You covet. You stomp your feet. You demand your way. You deny your master. It's David disrobing Bathsheba. It's Adam accepting the fruit from Eve. It's Abraham lying about Sarah. It's Peter denying that he ever knew Jesus. It's Noah being drunk and naked in his tent. It's Lot being found in bed with his own daughter. It's your worst nightmare. It is sudden and it is sin. Satan numbs our awareness. He short-circuits our self-control. We know what we're doing, and yet we can't believe that we're doing it. The fog of weakness blinds us. We want to stop, but we haven't the will to do so. We want to turn around, but our feet won't move. We want to run, and pitifully at the same time we want to stay. It's the teenager in the back seat. It's the alcoholic buying just one more. It's the boss touching his secretary's hand. It's the husband walking into the porn shop. It's the mother losing her temper. It's the father beating his child. It's the gambler losing his money. It's the Christian losing control. And it's Satan gaining a foothold. Confusion, guilt, rationalization, despair, it all hits, and it all hits hard. And we numbly pick ourselves up and we stagger back into our world. Oh God, what have I done again? Should I tell someone? I'll never do it again. My God, can you forgive me? No one who is hearing these words is free from the treachery of the suddenness of sin. No one is immune to this trick of perdition. This demon of hell can scale the highest monastery wall. He can penetrate the deepest faith. He can desecrate the purest home. Some of you know exactly of which I speak. You could write these words even better than I. Some of you, like me, have tumbled so often that the stench of Satan's breath is far from a novelty. You've asked for God's forgiveness so often that you worry that the well of mercy might run dry. You want to sharpen up your defenses a bit? Do you need help in reinforcing your weaponry? Have you tumbled down that manhole once too many times? And I want you to consider these few ideas. First of all, recognize Satan. Our war is not with flesh and blood, but it's with Satan himself. Do like Jesus did when Satan met him in the wilderness. Call him by name. Rip off his mask. Denounce his disguise. He appears in the most innocent of clothing, a night out with the boys, a good book, a popular movie, a pretty neighbor. But don't let him fool you. When the urge to sin rears its ugly head, look him squarely in the eye and call his bluff. Get behind me, Satan. Not this time, you dog of hell. I've walked your stinking corridors before. Go back into the pit where you belong. Whatever you do, don't flirt with this fallen angel, or he will thrash you like wheat. Secondly, after recognizing Satan, accept God's forgiveness. Romans chapter 7 is the emancipation proclamation for all of us who have a tendency to tumble. In verse 15, Paul says, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, and what I hate is the very thing I do. Does that sound familiar? Keep reading, verses 18 and 19. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I can't carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do, and the evil that I do is the very thing I do not want to do, and I just keep on doing it. Man, this fellow has been reading my diary. Wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death? Please, Paul, don't stop there. Is there not some oasis in this barrenness of guilt? There is. Thank God and drink deeply as you continue to read verse 25 of chapter 7 and verse 1 of chapter 8. Thanks be to God that through Jesus Christ our Lord, there is now therefore no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. There it is. You read it right. Underline it if you wish. For those in Christ Jesus, there is no condemnation, absolutely none. Claim the promise. Memorize the words. Accept the cleansing. Throw out the guilt. Praise the Lord. And keep an eye out for that next open manhole. When you think about your life, when you think about your walk with God, we are all at different places. And it might be as you're sitting here this morning, even though you're sitting here this morning, no one sitting around you might be aware of the stench, but you are. No one sitting around you is aware that you're way away from the Father. But you are. No one may be recognizing that you're falling down that mountain. But you are. Wow, please, David, don't stop there. You know the good news of the gospel? Just come home. Just come home. Just come home. You're not going to be interrogated about where you've been. You're not going to be interrogated about what you've done. You're going to be embraced by the Father. You're going to be kissed. You're going to be given the best robe. Not just any robe, the best robe. And there's going to be a celebration. God is not willing for anyone to perish, but for everyone to just come home. God is calling the prodigal home. A couple of our shepherds are going to be in the back of the auditorium. Another one will join me right down here at the front. The pathway to home is either direction while we stand.